Welcome to Work Life by Design. I'm your host, Mel Marsden. As a passionate entrepreneur with a desire to create places where people and business thrive, I hope to inspire you to find your place at work and in life so you can live a life by design. You'll hear stories of transformation, exploring everything from organisational psychology to brand, and identifying opportunities in your workplace and your life to inspire your human potential. So, let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Work Life by Design. Today, we're going to be exploring a little bit about what it takes to create a thriving workplace. Now, back in episode 84, I was sharing with you how excited I was to be heading back to Sydney, where I was presenting at the Thriving Workplaces Conference. And I was talking about the impact of our physical environments on creating social capital within our organisations. But what I want to do today is I want to share with you some of the insights that I took away from my 2 days at that conference, because what I saw there was the exploration of how it's a collective pursuit of so many different aspects to support the creation of a thriving workplace. It is not something that is purely to be put on the people and culture team or the health and safety and the wellbeing team, nor is it something that we should be offloading and just putting onto our leadership team either. And, from the perspective that I design from, it's not just about the physical environment and the digital environment either, because a lot of the work that I can do is about transforming and translating the brand, the culture, the purpose of an organization into the physical environment to support some of the guidance of behavior. But if we are not then backing that up with good cultural practices, health and wellbeing practices, systems and processes and policy, then we are not taking the full advantage of what we have available to us to really, really embed and create a thriving workplace. And so it's when we're looking at this from more of a consolidated effort that ranges from leadership through to those on the ground, and we're looking at our policies, we're looking at our processes, we're looking at our language and even our behavior, that's when we can start to really bring together all of these elements to create a thriving workplace. Now, this is the Thriving Workplaces Conference that is hosted by the lovely ladies, Sophie and Claire from the Serenity Collective. And over the course of these 2 days, we went through a range of different topics and we explored how each of these aspects and many, many more all contribute to creating a thriving workplace. And so what I want to do today is I want to share with you 3 of the themes that really emerged for me that I think kind of spoke to the essence of what was talked about over those 2 days. Now, it's certainly not everything that was captured and all of the conversations that we're having there, but it certainly starts to distill down some of these themes that I was starting to recognize that were popping up through the different panel discussions and the different presentations that were happening across those 2 days. Now, the other thing I just want to say is this conference is not like your typical conference. It is a real conversation that is happening with a broad range of people, from general management level to operations to people and culture to health and wellbeing, to all sorts of people who are coming along who are very much invested in transforming our workplaces from the inside out by really starting to look at what it is that we need to be taking on board to be transforming our workplaces into the future. Now, we've been given some incredible opportunities off the back of the pandemic to really start to relook at what our organisations can do to support the mental, physical and emotional wellbeing of our employees. And this is just a start of that conversation. So one of the first themes that I started to see come through was around the need for purpose. Now, this is absolutely one of my favourite conversations, and I know from the energy that was happening in the room there, it is a conversation and a passion that I share with at least 120 other people. But I think there are really 2 layers to purpose at work, and that's around having your own purpose. And we talk about this a lot in the Live a Life by Design program, and understanding what your individual purpose is and what your mission is here on this earth and the impact that you want to create. But secondly, what is the purpose of the organization? Because when we are able to align our own individual purpose with that of our organization, that's what's really giving our lives meaning, and it makes our work far more meaningful. And that was something that started to come up very, very early on in the conversation. And when you start to think about what your purpose is something that is far bigger than you. It is the why you do what you do. It's what connects you to your values. It's what creates alignment for you within your life. And as one of the panelists, Karen from Medibank, pointed out, she said it could be argued that if you don't have purpose, you will struggle to find your own self-worth. And I really resonated with that comment because what that started to help me realize and process in my own mind was that when we don't have this strong individual connection to our own purpose, what can start to happen is we can start to lose ourselves. We can start to get disconnected. We can start to take on responsibilities and go down on journeys and let others guide us. And that's when our self-worth starts to wander because we don't have this strong sense of who we are inherently. Now, from a business perspective, Daniel Flynn, who's the co-founder of Thank You, he really described this really beautifully. He described purpose as the fuel on the inside versus the paint on the outside. So it's what drives your decision making. It's what gives your organization momentum, focus, and energy versus those few token words or a marketing campaign. So he was describing the fact that when you've got your purpose really embedded into the business, it's the stuff that drives you forward. It's what fuels your people. It gives them that motivation and helps you kind of translate and transfer that into the way that you do business and to give your business that momentum to move forward. Whereas when we start to see the paint on the outside, this is the tokenistic stuff. This is when we're saying things, but we're not actually then living them. Now, he's also very conscious of the fact that operating a purpose-led business doesn't come without its challenges, because when you're balancing purpose against compliance requirements or operational commercials, all of this can actually sometimes feel a little bit counterintuitive. Sometimes you're having to invest money and resources and time into something that doesn't make financial sense, but it's the right thing to do because it's actually delivering through on the purpose. And he even explained that at Thank You, they had to return to their roots at one point because they had actually lost their way. They had to really reconnect with who they were, what their purpose was, and to start to tell that story so that they could bring people back on the journey. They had to reinvigorate the company from the inside out as they began to grow, because what was happening is they were becoming bogged down by the commercials. They were becoming bogged down by the compliance requirements, and they had lost that fuel. They had lost that passion for what the purpose of the organization was and what was that bigger impact that they were trying to make. And so they had to go back and really reconnect with that, because I think, and I believe, and I speak about this quite openly and quite a lot, is that it all starts with purpose. Because when we have our purpose is informing our brand. Our brand is leading our culture is defining our values, and our values are then guiding our behavior. So it all starts with purpose. And another thing that was said by Anne Desgupta from Sydney Waters, Head of Culture and Performance, she described it as the stories we tell is the culture we create. And I just thought that was such a beautiful statement, because it really is. The story that we tell around what it is that we do, what is the higher purpose we are here to contribute to, that is all designing the culture that we want within our organizations. And so when we have that purpose, we're really building connection and belonging because we're sharing these stories. And so that's the other thread that I started to see come through those 2 days, is this need to feel like we belong, and the many ways that we can create this through the connection that we have at work. Because as humans, we are all hardwired for belonging. Belonging is what keeps us safe. It's what keeps us alive. We are pack animals. And so we search out ways in which we can feel that we belong. And when we belong, we are looking for those shared experiences, those shared values, those shared stories where we can start to connect on a more personal level and really build that sense of camaraderie within our workplaces. So purpose and belonging have a very strong connection with how we can then create a thriving workplace. Now, the next thing that really come through very, very strongly for me was around really supporting our people to create a mental health and wellbeing literacy. Now, what I really liked about this was it actually started to shift the conversation from health and wellbeing being a leader's responsibility And, particularly throughout the pandemic, we've been putting a huge amount of pressure onto our leadership team to be able to support the people within their teams, to support the people within their organisation. And that's a huge responsibility for many of our leaders to wear. And often they're not adequately equipped to have some of these really important conversations. So what I found through the conference over the 2 days was it was really, really refreshing that I saw some of those conversations started to shift. And some of the terminology that was actually being used was that our managers don't need to be doctors. So they're not someone who's there diagnosing or taking care of the individual, but they're one of actually having understanding and encouraging awareness and this mental health literacy so that they can have more informed conversations, they can hold space for people that they want to care for, but they've also then got the knowledge to direct them to the most appropriate resources and support networks. So it wasn't about them having to have the answers or knowing how to help that person, but it was about shifting that conversation so that it started to give them the tools and the resources to be able to support that person in taking the appropriate steps to get the support that they needed from the appropriate professionals. And what I really loved about some of these conversations that we were having throughout the course of the conference was that they've become quite a lot deeper and they started to see the individual as the whole person. Now, we've been talking about this concept of bringing your whole self to work and being seen as a whole person at work for quite some time, but it's only in some of these more progressive organisations that we've started to see how they're actually translating that into action. And so with this focus on creating even greater equity in our workplaces, there were some really great examples of how various organisations have taken those concepts and put them into practice by actually shifting policy within the organisation. So, for example, ING have ensured that parental leave is an equal opportunity access for both men and women with the birth of a child. And so what they've seen is that there's actually more men in their organisation taking up parental leave now, as opposed to the women in the organisation. Now, the reason that this makes a big difference is because what we are doing is we are actually bringing equality into the workplace by enabling the female in the relationship, the mother of the child, to return to work if that is what she chooses, and then enabling the father to be the one to stay at home and be the primary caregiver. So we've actually then been able to change the conversation. We're not just assuming that the mother is the person who's going to be staying at home with the birth of the child. We're giving the choice back to the family and enabling both of those people to make that decision. So that's been a big shift in their organisation, and that shift is actually rippling out into the wider community, because whilst it's happening within the ING community, it's the women of those men that are actually benefiting from this in other organisations. And so we've got this lovely ripple effect that's happening. Never before have we collectively experienced such change on a global scale. The pandemic, whilst on one hand has challenged us in ways that previously we could have only imagined, on the other, it has opened the doors to incredible opportunity. The opportunity to redesign our work lives in a way that works for us. An opportunity to disrupt, reset, and recreate our new normal. And to help you on this journey, I am so excited to bring to you the Work Life Lounge. This is your VIP pass to accessing some of the greatest thought leaders in our world of work. So often we are told what we need to do and why we need to do it, but we are often left wondering, but how? How do I make the changes that I need to? And that's where the Work Life Lounge is here to support you, to guide you step by step through the how, to take back control and design your work life on your own terms. I can't wait to see you in the lounge. Now, let's get back to the episode. Another organisation example that was presented was from EY, so Ernst & Young, and this one was particularly beautiful and something that's quite close to my heart, but it was about recognising the heartbreak of miscarriage and stillbirths within their employees. And so what they have done is they've implemented a 5-day leave policy, but also access to support networks such as that of Pink Elephants. So what that's enabling them to do, and this was the beautiful conversation, was that often we don't talk about our pregnancies until we're in the second trimester. We've got past that 13-week mark, we're in the safe zone and we can start to communicate. However, most miscarriages happen within that 13 weeks. And it just doesn't have the same impact when we tell people about our loss after we have lost that baby. Whereas when we are openly sharing the fact that we are pregnant, and then if we do unfortunately lose that baby, there's far deeper connections that happen amongst the organisation that they can then have those conversations. But recognising that that is just as traumatic for people and that it needs to be recognised, it needs to be spoken about, and it needs to be supported, these organisations are starting to take those steps to do so. So that's with Ernst & Young. They've started to recognise the impact that miscarriage and stillbirths have on their employees. And the third organisation that have started to make progress in this space is Future Super. Now, I really particularly enjoyed this conversation because what they've done is they have introduced what they call their Bloody Good policy, and it's around supporting women through menopause and menstruation by offering them 6 days leave a year in addition to their standard sick leave to support them in managing their symptoms more effectively without compromising on their careers. Now, this was a really interesting conversation because there was a decision that was made around it being 6 days as opposed to 12 because they already have a 6-day leave policy for mental health as well within the organisation, so they're making steps forward there. But it also shifted the conversations within the organisation. And I think this is something that's more broadly the impact of making these policy shifts, because they are enhancing employee engagement in their respective organisations, but they've also opened the door to have far more meaningful and deeper conversations with those that have experienced tragic loss and have previously suffered in silence. It's opened up conversations for younger females to learn more about the symptoms of menopause, for men to share more compassionately the debilitating effects of conditions like endometriosis that they might be having with their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters. And for men and women alike to be able to share that excitement of their growing families earlier, enabling them those greater levels of support in the workplace should that unthinkable thing happen. So what these policy shifts have enabled is an awareness and a literacy that has greatly benefited the organisation. So the policy is just a vehicle to making this possible, and it's really started to strengthen that deeper sense of belonging because what they've started to see is these shared stories and experiences happening for their people. And I just think that's such a beautiful example of when we empower people and we support them, the reaction that we're getting back. And what Future Super have found is that 1.3 days of that leave was being accessed per month across the entire organisation. So it's not 1.3 days per female. That was 1.3 days across the entire employee base per month was being accessed. Yet their employee engagement score in their female cohort of employees had absolutely skyrocketed. And that is just off the back of the recognition of what women go through and how that then ripples back and gives back to the organisation. So some really beautiful stories in there of how when we start to empower our people with policy change, that it changes the conversation and the engagement within the business. Now, our third and final theme that I really started to see coming through was the conversation around returning to the workplace. So this is all around hybrid work and how and when and why we are returning back into our workplaces. So some of these organisations are really leading the change with conversations focused around how we work as opposed to where we work, whilst others were really struggling with the mandates around days in the office and return to work policies. So this is a conversation that I speak about quite extensively, but what was really apparent to me is that the extreme variability in everyone's desire to return back to the workplace. Something that was really struck me was the difference in each person's individual lived experiences, particularly from the various states, and the fear that some employees were genuinely holding for their health and safety in returning to the workplace. So the experience that Victoria has had compared to the experience that New South Wales has had compared to the way that Queensland have dealt with this and have lived through the last 2 years of the pandemic is all very, very different and has contributed to each person's own understanding and the story of how they have lived through these last 2 years. which means that we really need to be mindful of the extreme transformation that some of our lives and our work lives have gone under in the last 2 years. Now, one of the gentlemen that spoke at the conference was Simon Barron-Greaves from FSG. And I really like the way that he framed this. He said, we have established new habits, new routines, and new behaviours over the past 2 years that are guiding our expectations around returning to the workplace. Now, for some of us, this might mean that we no longer have after-school care because we're at home to look after our children. For others, they may have moved to more desirable locations to align with their personal and family lifestyle aspirations, which means that commuting is now undesirable, if not near impossible for some employees. So, even the CEO of ING was talking about the fact that she leaves now and picks up her children in the afternoon so she can be at home and look after them, and then continues to work in the afternoons. So we've all adapted to our different work scenarios and what's going to work for us. So we need to be really conscious of that and understand how people's lives have shifted, how their routines have shifted, how their expectations of work have shifted, and what we can be doing to look at that. One of the things that we did all start to agree on, though, is that we need to be having this conversation around returning to the workplace. And this conversation needs to start with the question, what is the purpose of our workplace? Why do we actually need to come to work? Now, one of the things that I think we really need to be understanding in this is we need to be having this conversation collectively, because we have been working remotely in various ways over the last 2 years. So what is the driver for us to be coming back into the workplace? We need to be understanding that, we need to be unpacking that, and we need to be leveraging that so that we're not just mandating people to return to the workplace, because I would argue that the workplace that we left 2 years ago no longer works. And in some cases, in the workplaces that I have seen, it didn't work then. It was noisy, it was disruptive, it didn't enable conversation, it didn't enable collaboration. So we need to be really conscious of why we want people to come back. What are we expecting from them when they are in the workplace? How is the workplace then enabling them and enriching their lives and enhancing their experience of work? And to quote one of my former guests and colleagues, Dr. Kirsty Groves from the UK, she talked about the fact that we need to make our workplaces magnetic and not mandated. We need to actually make these environments places that people want to come to, that they're attracted to, that they're drawn into, rather than, beating them up with a big stick and going, you need to be in here and you need to be doing this. To do that, though, our workplaces need to deliver an experience. And it's one that we can't get from working at home. We know we can work from anywhere, but our workplaces need to be the place that we go to connect. They go to collaborate, we go to build community. And coming back to where we started this conversation, we need to be building social capital. So by doing that, we start to deepen our relationships with one another. We're deepening that relationship with the organisation, and we're really starting to transform our entire experience of work by connecting us back to our first theme that came out of this whole conference around meaningful work and that sense of belonging. That's what our workplaces, those physical environments that we are being asked to come back into, need to enable. And if they're not doing that, then they're probably failing to support any kind of organizational transformation. And that's going to have long-term effects on employee attraction and retention, culture, all the other things that are really going to be helpful in us driving our businesses forward. So this was really just a snapshot of some of the depth of sharing and the connection that I really got to experience over those 2 days. And it was just such a great conversation to be looking at all the different aspects that go into creating and supporting and enabling a workplace to truly thrive. It requires digital transformation, physical transformation, cultural transformation. We need to be looking at all these aspects around policy change and supporting our employees to really feel like we are invested in them and their individual growth. So if this sounds like a conference that you would want to be attending, and I really don't want to even call it a conference, it's more of an event or a gathering of people coming together to share ideas. And when we're sharing those ideas, we're talking about what are the opportunities that could be explored. We are sharing what worked, we're sharing what didn't work, and looking at ways that we can all collectively change people's experience of work and for the better from all these different aspects. And it was just a beautiful conversation. So they're my 3 key themes that I took away from this year's conference or gathering. And I wanted to share them with you because it helps to broaden our perspective of what is possible. But it also then helps us to understand how really simple policy change and change in language can make such a big impact on the way that people feel about an organization. And therefore, that reciprocity, that discretionary effort, everything that we put back into the business and how that can be shifted by an organization making substantive steps forward to support me as an individual, as an employee of the organization, and recognizing my contribution. So that's it for another week. That's the 3 themes that I saw come out of the Thriving Workplace Conference. So it was all around purpose, creating mental health and wellbeing literacy, and starting to really talk about what hybrid work looks like and the return to the workplace in your organization. So until next week, have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I'd love to hear, has your organisation started to implement any of these sorts of policy changes? If they have, what have you noticed? If they haven't, how could this actually start to impact on the development of your organisation in a more positive way to start to see it thrive? I'd love to know. So send me a message on Instagram at Melma or send me an email. I'd love to have a conversation about what's working in your workplace and how we can all start to create a thriving workplace. I'll catch you next week. Bye. Thank you for joining me for Work Life by Design. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to rate, review, or subscribe, or all 3, in iTunes and share it with your friends so we can continue to build this community. I would love to hear from you, so if you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions, you can connect with me on Instagram at Melma or send me an email at melissa@melissamarsden.com.au. I hope this episode has given you a few sparks of inspiration so that you can design a work life you love.